The day started like any other family outing, filled with the promise of quality time together. Our weekend trip to visit my parents had been planned for weeks, and I had been looking forward to it. My husband, Tom, had been excited to see his parents as well, but I couldn't shake the unease I felt about the impending visit with my mother-in-law, Susan. As we prepared for the trip, I noticed Susan's icy demeanor, which had become increasingly common in recent months. It seemed that no matter what I did, I couldn't win her approval. Despite my best efforts to be polite and accommodating, she found reasons to criticize me, from the way I dressed the kids to the food I cooked. Her disapproval of our relationship was palpable. Our two small children, Sarah and Jake, were oblivious to the tension between their grandmother and me. They were excited about the trip, their faces lit up with anticipation as we packed their favorite toys and snacks. The morning was exceptionally cold, with frost glistening on the car's windows as we bundled the kids into their car seats. Despite the chill, I put on a brave face, hoping that the weekend would be pleasant and that Susan and I could set our differences aside for the sake of the family. Little did I know that the frigid weather outside was nothing compared to the icy encounter that awaited us on the road. Our journey had only just begun, and the simmering tension between Susan and me would soon boil over into a confrontation that would change the course of our trip and our relationship forever. As we continued our drive, the atmosphere inside the car became increasingly tense. It was as if an invisible barrier separated Susan and me from the rest of the world, isolating us in our simmering dispute. The argument began innocuously enough, with a minor disagreement over something trivial. It's strange how such mundane things can sometimes serve as the spark that ignites a firestorm of emotions. I can't even recall the exact subject of our dispute. It felt like an excuse for Susan to vent her pent-up frustration and resentment towards me. It started with passive-aggressive comments and snide remarks, but quickly escalated into a full-blown argument. Tempers flared and harsh words were exchanged in the confines of the car. Tom tried to mediate, but his attempts only seemed to fuel the flames. It was clear that Susan had been harboring resentment for some time, and she was no longer willing to hold back. I could feel my own anger rising, but I knew that losing my temper in front of our children would only make things worse. I tried to remain calm, repeating to myself that it wasn't worth it, that we should focus on enjoying the trip and our time with family. Despite my efforts to defuse the situation, Susan's rage continued to grow. The tension in the car became suffocating, and I found myself longing for an end to the confrontation, even if it meant giving in to Susan's demands. Little did I know that Susan's anger was about to reach a devastating climax, leading to a shocking ultimatum that would change the course of our journey in an unexpected and chilling way. The argument inside the car had escalated to a point where it seemed like there was no turning back. Susan's face was flushed with anger, and her voice trembled with intensity. I couldn't believe how quickly a simple disagreement had spiraled into this tense and hostile atmosphere. As the car continued to move along the wintry road, Susan abruptly turned her attention toward me, her eyes filled with a furious determination. It was at that moment that she uttered those shocking, heart-stopping words, "Walk home, stupid." Time seemed to stand still for a moment. The weight of her ultimatum hung heavy in the air, and I struggled to process what had just happened. She wasn't joking, and it was clear that she was dead serious about her demand. My heart pounded in my chest, and I glanced back at my two small children, Sarah and Jake, who were sitting in their car seats in the back. Their innocent faces were contorted with confusion and fear, unable to comprehend the sudden turn of events. I looked back at Susan, and she repeated her harsh command. Her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I realized that I had a choice to make, and the well-being of my children was my top priority. Swallowing my pride and fighting back tears, I unbuckled my seatbelt and slowly opened the car door. The frigid winter air rushed in, causing my breath to form icy clouds. As I stepped out onto the desolate road, I knew that I was leaving behind the warmth of the car and the comfort of my family. The car doors slammed shut, and the tires screeched as they accelerated away, leaving me alone in the bitter cold, stranded on a desolate winter road with my two bewildered children. In that moment, I couldn't have imagined the challenging journey that lay ahead of us, or the profound impact this ultimatum would have on our lives. As the car sped away, The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I was standing on the side of a desolate winter road with my 2 small children, Sarah and Jake, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. The frigid wind cut through my clothing, causing an immediate and painful chill. Despite the shock and humiliation I felt, I knew that I couldn't let this situation escalate any further in front of my children. They were my top priority, and their safety and well-being had to come first. Sarah and Jake, still strapped into their car seats, stared at me with wide eyes, their little faces contorted with confusion and fear. I could see their breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. I quickly leaned back into the car, undoing their seatbelts and pulling them out, one by one. I held them close, my arms wrapped tightly around their shivering bodies. They clung to me, seeking warmth and comfort. I whispered soothing words to them, assuring them that everything would be all right, even though I wasn't entirely sure of that myself. In that moment, I made a painful decision. I couldn't just stand there in the cold, hoping that someone would come to our rescue. I had to take action and get my children to safety as quickly as possible. My parents' house was nearly 8 kilometers away, and although the distance was daunting, it was our only option. With Sarah and Jake huddled against me, I began to walk, each step taking us further away from the car and the woman who had left us stranded in the bitter cold. The snow-covered road stretched out before us, and I knew that the journey ahead would be long and challenging. But I was determined to get my children to warmth and safety, no matter the obstacles we would face along the way. As I walked along the desolate winter road with my 2 small children, Sarah and Jake, huddled against me for warmth, the gravity of our situation weighed heavily on my mind. The bitter cold seemed to seep into our very bones, and every step we took was a struggle against the biting wind and icy terrain. I could feel the frosty air cutting through my clothing, and my breath came out in visible puffs of white with each exhale. The snow underfoot crunched loudly with every step, a stark reminder of our isolation in this frozen landscape. Sarah and Jake, too young to fully understand the danger we were in, clung to me, their small hands gripping my coat as they shivered. Their faces were red from the cold, and their eyes were filled with confusion and fear. I did my best to reassure them, telling them that we were going on an adventure, trying to make the situation seem less dire than it truly was. My mind raced with thoughts of how we would make it to my parents' house. I had no phone, no money, and no means of transportation. The road stretched out endlessly before us, and the prospect of walking nearly 8 kilometers in these freezing conditions was daunting. But I couldn't give in to despair. I had to stay strong for my children. I was acutely aware of the passing cars, each one a potential lifeline. I considered flagging down a passing driver, but the fear of what Susan might do if she caught us attempting to escape kept me from doing so. I also worried that a stranger might not be trustworthy, given the unpredictability of our situation. With each step, my determination grew. I was determined to protect my children and get them to safety, no matter the hardships we would face along the way. The winter landscape was unforgiving, but the love and responsibility I felt for Sarah and Jake fueled my determination to persevere. The frigid trek was just beginning, and I could only hope that we would find help and warmth at the end of our long, cold journey. As we continued our arduous journey along the snow-covered road, the cold seeped into every fiber of my being. The wind seemed to cut through our clothing like a knife, and my children, Sarah and Jake, clung to me for warmth and comfort. Their little faces were still contorted with confusion and fear, but I did my best to shield them from the harsh reality of our situation. The landscape around us was desolate and quiet, except for the occasional passing car. I considered flagging one down, but the fear of Susan's wrath and the uncertainty of whether a stranger would be willing to help us kept me from attempting to hitch a ride. Instead, I trudged on, one step at a time, my determination unwavering. The snow underfoot was deep and uneven, making each step a challenge. I could feel the weight of my children in my arms, and the constant effort to keep them warm and safe was physically and emotionally draining. But I couldn't give in to fatigue or despair. The thought of my parents' house, a place of warmth and refuge, kept me going. Sarah and Jake, too young to understand the full extent of our predicament, occasionally asked questions like, "Mommy, why are we walking?" Or "When will we be at Grandma and Grandpa's?" Their innocent curiosity served as a bittersweet reminder that they were relying on me to protect them and guide them through this ordeal. As we walked, I silently prayed for a guardian angel, someone who would come to our rescue and end our suffering. I thought about my parents, who were eagerly awaiting our arrival, unaware of the nightmare we were enduring. The thought of their warm embrace and the safety of their home provided a glimmer of hope that kept me pushing forward. With each passing kilometer, the winter day seemed to grow darker, and the chill in the air more biting. I knew that our journey was far from over, but I was determined to endure whatever hardships lay ahead. The long, cold walk was taking its toll, but the love and responsibility I felt for my children were the driving forces that kept me moving forward. The journey along the desolate winter road felt like an eternity, with each step bringing us closer to our destination. Sarah and Jake, still shivering in my arms, remained remarkably resilient despite the harsh conditions. Their innocence and trust in me were the sources of my strength as we trudged through the unforgiving cold. Finally, after what felt like an endless trek, we reached the familiar neighborhood where my parents lived. The sight of their house, adorned with twinkling holiday lights, filled me with a sense of relief and gratitude. It was a symbol of warmth and security, stark contrast to the bitter cold we had endured. As we approached the front door, I could see the curtains twitch, and my heart swelled with hope. I knocked urgently, and the door swung open to reveal my parents' worried faces. Their expressions quickly shifted from confusion to shock as they saw Sarah and Jake bundled up and shivering in my arms. Without a word, my mother ushered us inside, wrapping us in warm blankets and offering hot cocoa to thaw our frozen bodies. My father was on the phone with the police, reporting the incident and Susan's actions. They couldn't believe what had transpired and were overcome with a mix of anger and concern. Sarah and Jake, their small bodies still trembling, clung to me as my parents showered us with love and comfort. I reassured them that we were safe now, that we were with Grandma and Grandpa, and that everything would be okay. The hours that followed were a blur of warmth, love, and safety. Susan's actions and the harrowing journey we had endured seemed like a distant nightmare as we shared a meal, exchanged stories, and enjoyed the coziness of my parents' home. The kids played with their toys, their laughter filling the house, while my parents and I discussed how to handle the situation with Susan. As the evening wore on, I received a call from Tom, who had learned of our predicament. He was horrified and apologetic, vowing to deal with his mother's behavior and ensure our safety in the future. The rift between Susan and me had grown deeper, but Tom's commitment to our family gave me hope that we could overcome this ordeal. The long, cold walk had brought us to a place of warmth, both physically and emotionally. It was a stark reminder of the importance of family and the resilience of a mother's love. While the scars from that winter day would linger, we were surrounded by the love and support of those who truly cared for us, and that was enough to start the healing process. In the days that followed our harrowing journey and arrival at my parents' home, life began to regain a sense of normalcy, albeit tinged with the lingering tension caused by Susan's actions. Our children, Sarah and Jake, gradually recovered from the physical and emotional toll of the ordeal, thanks to the warmth and care provided by my parents. It wasn't long before the consequences of her impulsive and reckless actions caught up with Susan. She'd been trying to contact us since the moment she realized her grave mistake, but the calls and messages went unanswered. She was filled with remorse and guilt, unable to shake the image of her grandchildren stranded on the cold winter road. One evening, the phone rang, and my father answered it. It was Susan on the other end, her voice trembling with emotion. She was in tears, her words choked with regret and despair. She admitted to her impulsive behavior and the irrational anger that had consumed her during that fateful car ride. She confessed that she had never intended to put us in harm's way, and the guilt was eating her alive. The conversation between Susan and my father was filled with raw emotion. She begged for forgiveness, her voice breaking as she apologized for the pain and fear she had caused. She expressed her deep love for her grandchildren and her desire to make amends. My parents, though still angered by Susan's actions, were compassionate people. They believed in the power of forgiveness and second chances, They agreed to arrange a meeting between Susan and me with the hope that we could find a way to move forward and heal the rift that had grown between us. It was a tense and emotionally charged encounter when Susan came to my parents' home. The wounds were still fresh and the scars ran deep, but seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes and hearing her heartfelt apologies began to chip away at the walls of anger and hurt that had built up between us. As the days turned into weeks, Susan continued to seek forgiveness and make amends. She started therapy to address her anger issues and worked on rebuilding her relationship not only with me, but also with her grandchildren, Sarah and Jake, who over time began to soften towards their grandmother. As the weeks turned into months, the process of healing and reconciliation between Susan and me was gradual but steady. It was an emotionally charged period marked by difficult conversations and moments of vulnerability. While the wounds from that fateful winter day were deep, we were determined to move forward for the sake of our family, especially for Sarah and Jake, who deserved to have a loving relationship with their grandmother. Susan continued with her therapy, working earnestly on addressing her anger issues and learning healthier ways to cope with frustration and resentment. It was a positive sign that she was committed to changing and mending her relationship with me and her grandchildren. In time, we began to have open and honest conversations about the events that had transpired. Susan took full responsibility for her impulsive actions and the immense pain they had caused. Her genuine remorse was evident, and her willingness to listen to my perspective helped us bridge the gap of understanding that had once seemed insurmountable. I, too, had to confront my own feelings and emotions. It wasn't easy to let go of the hurt and anger, but I realized that harboring those negative emotions would only perpetuate the cycle of pain. I saw that Susan was genuinely trying to change and make amends, and that gave me hope. Sarah and Jake, the innocent victims of that bitter winter day, were the first to show signs of forgiveness. Children have a remarkable capacity for resilience and a desire for love and connection. They began to warm up to their grandmother once more, their little hearts eager to embrace the love and care she had to offer. With time, Susan's relationship with me improved as well. We both understood that our relationship would never be perfect, but we were committed to making it work for the sake of our family. We learned to communicate more effectively, set boundaries, and avoid the triggers that had led to the confrontation in the first place.